and welcome back to She Investigates, the podcast where we investigate all things weird. I'm your host, Gwen Ross, and I have got a wild story for you today. You may think you know what's happening, but you don't until the very end, trust me. But first, let's catch up. Okay, so this week for Let's Catch Up, I decided to bring my 11-year-old son, Ammon, back. Because last time I had him on, I had so many people tell me that they loved listening to him. And he also has a big event this week that I wanted to talk about. He is normally like a sports kid through and through. Like he's on a football team. He loves playing basketball. But he's kind of going outside of his comfort zone this week. And he signed up to be in the school musical. And they are performing this week. And the musical that they're doing this year is Lion King Jr., And Ammon, why don't you go ahead and tell us what part you're going to be playing?
Ed the hyena.
And tell us a little bit more about your part as Ed.
Ed usually communicates with grunts and laughters. And the other two hyenas are always like Ed. So I think that he's the leader of the pack.
You think he's the head hyena?
Oh, yes.
And what has been your favorite part about being in the school musical?
I just like performing in front of thousands of students, and it's just so fun being part of the action, and wearing that cool costume and all the makeup, and every single time that I say my line, the audience has laughed. Like this, 2,000 students have laughed.
Yeah, you're definitely one of the funniest parts of the show, I think.
Oh, yes, I am.
And are you more excited for the show or nervous for the show?
I'm somewhat nervous, but I'm mostly excited.
Do you think you're going to want to do the musical again next year?
Yes, definitely.
What made you want to be in the musical in the first place?
Because watching the musical just by myself was just boring. So I wanted to be part of that action.
That's fun. Okay, why don't you give us your best Ed the Hyena laugh? Wow, it sounds like you've been practicing hard. That was really good and evil sounding. All right, Ammon, good luck at your show this week. And can you sing us a little part of one of the songs for your way out?
Yes, my teeth and ambitions are bad. Be prepared.
All right. Thanks, Ammon. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome. Bye.
And with that, let's jump into today's case. Today, we are going to be discussing the disappearance and kidnapping of Shannon Matthews, and we're going to be hopping across the pond to the UK. Our story today takes place in West Yorkshire, which is kind of fun for me because I have a lot of family that is from Yorkshire, England, so that's kind of a fun connection for me. But Shannon was born on September 9th, 1998, and at the time that she disappeared, she was only 9 years old. She lived in Dewsbury Moor, West Yorkshire, and she lived in a council estate called the Moorside. And if you're unsure what a council estate, what it is, it's basically just like government housing. It's what they call their government housing in the UK. And she lived there with her mom, Karen Matthews, and her mom's boyfriend, Craig Meehan. She lived with 4 of her 7 siblings. Karen had 7 children with 5 different dads. So some of them lived with her and some of them lived with their dads. And this was just overall a very poor area. They had a high crime rate, high unemployment rate. Most of the people were claiming benefits for various things. And Shannon was very introverted and shy. She only really had a couple of close friends. And her birth father was pretty much out of the picture. Her mom's boyfriend, Craig Meehan, was only 18 years old. And that's 10 years younger than Karen herself, who was 28 at the time of all of this, which was a little strange to me, but to each their own, I guess. Shannon also had a really large family tree, but she only had one full brother. All of her other siblings were all half siblings. Now, her mother, Karen Matthews, she does have like a learning disability, and so she looks for acceptance from other people. She tends to kind of act more childish and immature. She would be considered more vulnerable than like the average adult. People thought that that might be one of the reasons why she had had so many children from so many different dads, because she was just seeking this attention from other people. Another reason to explain all of the children that she had was benefits. The more children that you had, the more money that the government would be willing to send you. And so having kids basically was kind of like her full-time job. All of the little checks that she got for her 7 kids added up to like a full wage. And her friends and family actually had stated that they believed that to Karen, children equal benefits. So on Tuesday, February 9th, 2008, it was a school day, and Shannon got all ready for school and headed out. And her school was doing free swimming lessons as part of their curriculum for Shannon's age group. I remember my school did this when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, I believe. And so her and her class went to the local swimming pool that day. And the footage of her at the swimming pool is actually the last footage of her before she disappeared. The class took a bus back home, and nobody was there to pick Shannon up. Her mom was gone shopping with family and wasn't there to grab her from the bus stop. Karen's stepdad, Craig, was supposed to be at work that day, but he stayed home because he wasn't feeling good. So he was at home when Karen got home from shopping at around 4, and he told her, hey, Shannon still isn't home yet. And her school finished at around 3 o'clock, probably around 2:30. So it had been over an hour since she was expected home. And they didn't really panic at first. They kind of just thought, the normal things that we think when we can't find our kids, like they're probably at a friend's house. They just forgot to tell us. And so she didn't really panic at first. But by 4:30, Karen started going to friends and neighbors trying to find her. It started getting dark and started getting really cold. This is February in England, so it's getting dark early and the temperatures are pretty frigid at night. So Karen's friend Petra finally convinced her, you need to call the police and report her missing. The police were there within minutes of being called, checking friends and family and searching for her. And within an hour, the news was starting to spread around this community in this council estate that she was missing. And the Matthews house was soon just full of friends and family that all wanted to help search for Shannon. And Karen seemed very upset at this point, very distraught, can't find her daughter. And the search went on for hours, all through the night. The search didn't conclude until like 4 a.m. And by the morning, things were starting to look more serious since she had been gone all night. And like I mentioned, it was cold winter weather. So it was starting to look more like this was an abduction than just a runaway. And so her story actually ran on the local news. And it was at this point that family liaison officers were assigned to the family. And these are officers who basically their whole job is to be liaisons for the police department to the family. And the main officer that was assigned to the family was an officer named Christine Freeman. And she started to feel like something was off really from the very beginning. Because when she arrived at the house, Craig and Karen were just sitting there playing their Xbox, seemingly just completely unbothered by the fact that their daughter was missing. And not only that, a little while later, one of the liaison officer's cell phone rang during the visit, and she had just like a popular song as her ringtone. And Karen stood up and started dancing to the tune and saying, oh, I love this song so much. And that just like struck the liaison officers as completely inappropriate, given the situation that her daughter was missing, and she just seemed like everything was normal, business as usual. So after searching the house, the officers found some words that were written on the wall next to Shannon's bunk bed. She had kind of been using her wall as like a makeshift diary, and she had written the words, I want to live with my dad. Karen ran through the events of the morning before with Christine, and she said that the whole family ate breakfast together, and then Shannon's last words were, quote, bye, mommy, love you, end quote. This is strange to me because I'm thinking about my own house in the morning. I only have 3 kids. They have 4 kids, but my children are like sloths in the morning. I have to like tell them a million times to get dressed and to eat breakfast and to get their shoes on and get ready for school. And we are just rushing around. We don't have time to sit around the table and have like a nice family breakfast every morning. And so that was kind of strange to me that they all sat down and had this like picture perfect breakfast. And not only that, one of the liaison officers noticed that the family table was actually like covered in stuff, which indicated that they probably weren't sharing a meal together around this table just the morning before. So at this point, we're only 24 hours into the investigation trying to find Shannon, and over 300 officers had been brought in to help with the search. And the community was really just pulling together to do their own search for Karen. People were taking days off of work. They were giving up all of their spare time looking for Shannon. And people from all over Yorkshire were traveling into Dewsbury Moor just to try to help. People who had no idea who the family was or who Shannon was. They just wanted to be helpful. And at this point, with her being gone over 24 hours, it was really starting to look less and less likely that she was going to be found safe or alive. I'm sure we've all heard the statistics about how the chances of being found safe and alive just go down and down and down the longer that you have been missing. So the police started asking those not in law enforcement to kind of take a step back from the search, especially her family. They asked the Matthews to just kind of stay home because for two reasons. They didn't want them to stumble upon anything, and they also didn't want any crime scene to be contaminated if they were to find her. So since they couldn't help with the physical search anymore, they started making t-shirts and posters just to try to get Shannon's picture out there. They had a community building for the council estates, and I'm picturing this as kind of like a clubhouse for like an HOA where like everybody can gather together. And so the community building for the council estates was basically just converted into a headquarters for people to get information and to help, to pick up flyers to pass out. It was just like their base headquarters where everybody would gather to get updates on what was going on the case. The whole community just really pulled together, and it was really unfortunate because they had been labeled by the media as this like low-income area, dangerous neighborhood, just full of lowlifes with crime. But they really showed the spirit of their community during this search. There was even taxis that were donating rides to leads and handing out flyers. And the media was just relentless. They wanted photos and interviews, and they were kind of badgering the family during this whole process. On the second day of the investigation, about 28 hours in, Karen made an appearance on the news. And that was actually against the advice of police and friends. The police thought if the people who abducted Shannon saw the news coverage, they would be able to know the scope of the search to find her, and it might put Shannon at greater risk. But Karen did it anyways. And throughout the investigation, Karen's attitude was just very weird. It didn't seem like a woman that was worried about missing her child. And I know that like everybody processes trauma and these kind of situations differently. But she was joking a lot, she was laughing a lot, and it just seemed really inappropriate. And some of her friends said that she would just turn the tears on for the camera, and as soon as they were gone and behind closed doors again, she'd be smiling and joking again. And another thing that people were saying is that Karen seemed like she really liked the attention that the media was giving her. Everybody knew her, everybody wanted to help her. She really liked being recognized in public from like her being on the news. She also always just seemed 100% sure that Shannon was going to be found alive. She never seemed fearful about how long Shannon had been gone at all. Her friend that lived in the community with her, Natalie Murray, actually said she never even entertained the idea that she might be dead. So the police, as they do typically in every investigation that they do, they made a family tree diagram to try to start looking into family that may have been involved. But this was a huge family tree. I'm going to post a picture of it on my Instagram. But I mean, you think about it, she's got 7 kids with 5 different dads. You've got all of their families. Like, it was just this massive family tree. And when interviewing family, that's when the police learned about Karen Matthews' like learning disability and childlike behavior. And they also learned that the Matthews family often got into fights that the neighbors would hear. The neighbors mentioned that Shannon was always very dirty. She didn't look well taken care of. Neither did her siblings. And social services were reported to many, many times about the condition of the home and the children. But it doesn't really seem like much was done. There had actually been reports that were being made since 1996 when Karen had her very first child. She just always struggled to be like a competent, caring parent. And at one point, Shannon and her sibling were put on a child protection register. Another sibling had to be put in a foster home for a period of time. The home was dirty, it was full of garbage, and a lot of times they wouldn't pay the bills, so they wouldn't have electricity. The neighbors often reported that the kids were left home alone. Sometimes they were even left home alone overnight. They didn't go to school regularly. Basically, they just had a lot of problems. Like, her family just had a lot of struggles. So they finally decided to bring forensic teams in. They brought over 60 detectives in. And just for perspective, a normal case will get like 2 to 3 detectives, but they just came in guns blazing with 60 detectives for this investigation. Over 10% of West Yorkshire's forces were used in the investigation. This ended up costing a lot of money, this investigation, because of everybody that had to be paid, all of the police officers and the detectives and all of the searches that they were conducting. And it ended up running up to about over £3 million. The police questioned over 1,500 motorists. They searched over 3,000 homes. And it quickly became the biggest police investigation in 30 years. The biggest police investigation since the Yorkshire Ripper. And so in the UK, they had a grand total in all of the UK of 27 victim recovery dogs. And 16 of those were brought in for Shannon's case. They started underwater searches looking for her body. But as they started doing all of these searches, people started to notice a few inconsistencies in Karen's story. And they started to just notice her weird behavior. So 4 days into the investigation, Karen was taken in for questioning. Not as a suspect, but just as a witness. After a week of searching, there was still no trace of Shannon, and there was really no leads. But they had not given up the search. After 2 weeks, a local business offered a £5,000 reward for information to find Shannon. And The Sun, which is a local newspaper in the UK, actually upped that reward to £50,000, which I looked to convert that, and it's about $63,000. The media itself was actually starting to lose interest in this case, and that's because there really was no new information to even report. Craig was given leave from his job, her stepfather, to try to keep the investigation alive. And this is when the media began to kind of change their tune about the Matthews. And they kind of started to turn on them. They started painting them as the villains of the story. They accused Craig of abusing Shannon and assaulting her, and that it drove her to run away. But just to be clear, there was never any evidence of this. And the press continued to just pressure the Matthews for interviews and photos. And 3 weeks into the investigation, it was starting to look less and less likely that she would be found alive. Even though the media had kind of given up on this, the Matthews were receiving money, gifts, letters, and they were sent by people that didn't even know them. These people just wanted to show their support for this family that was going through such a difficult situation. A local supermarket actually even let them go get their groceries for free just to help out. And they filled 1 cart with food and 1 cart with beer. So though the media had lost their sympathy for the Matthews, the public was still very much supportive of them. The police continued to investigate, and they found that there was 1,400 registered sex offenders that lived within a 20-mile radius of Shannon. And despite that absolutely terrifying statistic, the police weren't able to link any of them to Shannon's disappearance. So one of the last big things that the community decided to do was to sponsor a walk for Shannon. They were singing and chanting and basically just campaigning for Shannon's return. This is when Karen's mother made another public appearance, but in this one, she shared her own theory of what she thought had happened, and this was something that she had never shared with the police, never shared with family or friends, and she said that she thought that someone that knew Shannon and her family had taken her. And this was just news to the police because she had never brought this up in any of her interviews with them, never given them anything to go on as far as who she thought that someone was. But just 2 days later, on March 14th, a distant family member called the police to give them a tip. They said that Craig Meehan's uncle, Michael Donovan, only lived about a mile away from the estate where the Matthews had lived. And he hadn't been in touch with any of the family since Shannon's disappearance, which at this point had been going on for 3 weeks. He hadn't helped with any of the searches, and this was just striking other family members as weird. Like, he lives so close. He's part of this community that's pulling together, and yet he's noticeably absent from everything. So the police began to look into him. He wasn't even on their radar really to begin with because the family tree was so massive, and they were really focusing more on like Karen's side of the family because Craig wasn't even a blood relative of Shannon. His birth name was Paul Drake, but he had actually changed his name to Michael Donovan. So that played a part in him not being on their radar as well. They found that he had 2 kids of his own and that they had been taken from him to live in foster care. He also actually had a previous abduction charge. Red flag should be going off right now from going to his children's school and taking them while they were in the care of a foster family. So that very same day, after hearing all of this, the police decide we need to go and question Michael. So they go to his apartment, they knock on the door, and nobody comes to the door. But the lady next door had actually heard the knocking, and she came to see what was going on. She mentioned that she had been hearing like small footsteps, like those of a child within the apartment, and she just actually heard them that morning. And she mentioned that she was even hearing these when Donovan wasn't home. No one answered the door. The police keep knocking, but they felt like they needed to get into the apartment after speaking to this woman. So they broke down the door and they started to search. And when they got into the apartment, it was just deathly quiet. There was nothing going on in this apartment. A lot of the doors inside the apartment were locked, and so they had to break those down as well. So they're going down the hall, breaking down doors, and finally, an officer on the scene heard a small voice coming from a bedroom saying, "Stop it, you're frightening me." So he went in the room that he'd heard it from, but he couldn't see Shannon anywhere. Then he saw the bed moving and her head poke out from under the bed. After 24 days of searching, Shannon had been found, and they removed her from the apartment. But where was Michael Donovan? Shannon had told the police that he was in the same place that she was, and they did find Michael under that same bed as well. And let me kind of describe the bed for you so that you understand how they both fit under this bed. The bed was the type of bed that has room under the mattress for drawers, and the drawers had been taken out and they were hiding in the spot where the drawers normally would be. So that's how they both fit. So they dragged Michael out of the apartment and he was arrested at the scene. And him and Shannon were actually taken to separate police stations. And Shannon's family was notified that she had been found safe and alive. And this community just celebrated the news as it spread. Everybody was elated. There was street parties. There was fireworks. Everybody that had been just so invested in this case over these 3 weeks was just so excited that she had finally been found. But Shannon herself was still at the police station being held in emergency police protection. They wanted to look into this a little bit more before they just passed her on to her family and stamped the case closed. They wanted to kind of assess the situation. And so as soon as Donovan started being questioned, he starts making some pretty serious allegations. He starts blaming Karen for being involved as well. After lawyering up, he released a statement, and he claimed that Karen asked him to look after Shannon for a while she reported her missing. He says that she threatened him that if he didn't agree to help her, that she would have men come after him. He detailed out this whole plan to fake an abduction, and he claimed that Karen also told him that if he helped her, that there was money in it for him. He kind of tried to paint himself as the victim as well. When he first left the apartment, he was walking fine on his own, but then when he gets to the police station, he suddenly needs a wheelchair and he needs a blanket because he's cold. So he kind of tries to make himself look more vulnerable and more like a victim than he actually was in the story. So 4 days goes by and Shannon still isn't home. People in the community still didn't exactly know what was going on at the police station. They didn't know what the holdup was for Shannon coming home. And they started to wonder what wasn't right. Karen was then taken into police custody after Donovan's claims that she was involved. And she straight up just denies everything and starts being extremely uncooperative. The police, meanwhile, are also searching Michael Donovan's house, and they found a wealth of evidence. They found what looked like an elastic leash hanging from a beam, though they don't really know what it was used for. They found prescription medications, and they also found this weird list of rules for Shannon. Basically, the rules were like, keep quiet, stay away from the windows, like all of that kind of stuff. And then at the bottom, it had been signed IPU, which they determined meant I promise you. The bed where they had hid was also taken into evidence. So after about a week, it was time for Karen to officially identify Shannon. She was taken into a room with a two-way mirror, and she could see Shannon, but Shannon couldn't see her. And Karen did identify her as being her daughter, but really, she showed no emotion. And I was just thinking, as I was going through this story, about a time when I lost my own children, when we had gone on vacation and we were staying at a vacation home. My kids were young, and I had been upstairs unpacking some stuff, and when I came back down, we couldn't find my two younger kids. And we noticed that the door to our apartment, our vacation rental, was open. And so we started looking frantically for them, losing our minds, and they had just walked down the street. That was it. But the joy and elation that I felt in finding them when they had been gone a grand total of 5 minutes, I can't even imagine seeing your daughter that has been missing for 3 weeks and showing no emotion. That just is a gigantic red flag for me. And the meeting was set up to reunite Shannon and her mother. When Shannon saw her mom, she came running up to her, but Karen almost shrugged her off. Karen had to actually be encouraged by the family liaison officers to be with Shannon and to play with her. She kept looking at her watch and putting her coat on, and she just looked like she didn't want to be there and she was ready to leave. And she showed very little interest in her daughter, which is so sad. Side note, when the police took all of the family computers and electronics when they were searching for Shannon, they did find something of interest on Craig Meehan's hard drive, and that was child pornography, and he was arrested for that. Now, none of the pictures were of Shannon or of her siblings, but this did start to change the public's view of this whole case. Everybody was just disgusted, and the doubt started to grow, and people started to believe that Shannon's parents had been involved this whole time. Karen had actually met Michael Donovan a few months earlier at Craig's father's funeral, and Shannon had met him that same night. So Karen's friends in the community, they decided that they wanted to try to get the truth out of Karen about what really happened. And eventually, Karen did admit to her friends and to the police that she did know that Shannon wasn't really missing. But that was all that she would really say. Once this estate neighborhood where they lived learned the truth, the neighbors were just disgusted and angry and hurt. So much time and energy and money had gone into this search, and these were resources that could have been used on other cases that had been pulled to help with this case that was just a complete fantasy. Karen claimed that she was planning to leave Craig, and that Michael Donovan had offered her a place for her and her kids to stay until she kind of got back on her feet. He offered to pick Shannon up from school that day, and Karen was supposed to get the other kids and then meet him at his place after Craig went to work. But if you remember, Craig didn't go to work that day because he wasn't feeling good. So she claims that she panicked when Craig asked where Shannon was, and she just went along with the claims that she was missing and called the police despite knowing where she was the whole time. Well, if you don't believe that story, you're not alone, because I don't believe it and the police didn't believe it either. They thought there had to have been another motive. There's no way that she just went along with this whole circus for 24 days just because of a misunderstanding. Donovan also claimed that it was because Karen wanted the reward money. She denied it, of course, but Donovan told the police that they had planned together for him to take Shannon to the market. She was supposed to walk around the market, be seen by the cameras, and he would meet up with her and see her, turn her in, and get the reward money, which he would then split with Karen. Now, did they not realize how stupid of a plan that would be? Did they not think that the police were never going to find the connection between Donovan and Karen and Craig and be suspicious of anything at all? I mean, I don't know. Clearly, we're not dealing with criminal masterminds here, but I just can't believe they ever thought that was a good plan. Also, during Donovan's questioning, he was asked how he had been keeping Shannon during the 24 days that she was missing. And it turned out that he was drugging her with the prescription drugs that were found at his apartment. So they got a urine sample from Shannon and sent it off for testing to try to find out what she'd been drugged with. And the results showed that she had not only been drugged with travel sickness tablets, but also antidepressants. Her urine showed that she had taken those drugs within 48 hours of her rescue. But they wanted to know how long she had been being drugged. And so what they did is they took a sample of her hair because they're able to tell from the hair how long the drugs have been in the system. And they were able to determine that she had been drugged not just after her abduction, but also in the 12 months leading up to her abduction. Like, that just leads me to ask, what was going on in this house that she was living in? Like, what must she have been going through before even the actual abduction? She had been drugged with temazepam, which is a benzodiazepine drug, meclizine, which is the active ingredient in those travel pills, an antidepressant drug, tramadol, which is a pain-killing drug, dihydrocodone, which is also a painkiller. And so Karen Matthews and Michael Donovan were found guilty of kidnapping Shannon Matthews, false imprisonment, and perverting the cause of justice. And they were both sentenced to 8 years, which to me does not sound like that much. But even worse, Craig Meehan was sentenced to only 20 weeks for possessing child pornography. His mother and 2 of his sisters were also charged with perverting the cause of justice. And I'm not really clear what part they played in all of this. I probably don't even want to know. But Karen did go to prison, and all of her children were taken away and put in foster families. Her friend, Julie Bushby, which had really headed up the investigation in the estate where they lived, was the only one that still came to visit her in prison. And she said she really only visited her to try to get answers to what had really happened. Like, I think this woman had just invested so much time and energy into this that she just desperately needed answers. But she never got any from visiting. And every time she went to visit Karen in prison, she said Karen always had injuries like black eyes, being scuffed up from being assaulted by other prisoners who just kind of took justice into their own hands, as they do in prison sometimes. So she ended up being released early in April of 2014 after only serving 4 years. And Michael was released even earlier than Karen. She was given a new public identity, but the courts thought that because of her learning disability and her vulnerability, she would not be able to be capable of maintaining a new identity entirely. So she uses her old name in like an official capacity for like doctor's offices, like airline tickets, but she uses her new name in like social situations. Also, Shannon was given a new identity as well. She was put into foster care somewhere else in the country, and we don't really know that much more about her life. This happened in 2008, so she would be 26 now, and we can really only hope that she's living a happier life with a new family that loves her, and that she's finally getting the family life that she deserves. I feel like she had been through so much in her young life that she deserved to have a family that loved her. And I was just blown away by how any mother could do this in this case, thinking about my own kids and my love for them and how I just could never do something like this. But money does drive people to do crazy things sometimes. And like I mentioned, she did have a learning disability. She was more childlike in nature, but I don't feel like that gives her a pass on this entire situation. I feel like even somebody who has those struggles, even somebody who's living in a low-income poverty area, like, you can still be a good human being. And so I don't feel like that's a free pass to her to do whatever she wanted. So that is the case of Shannon Matthews. And I want to know what you guys think over on my Instagram, She Investigates Pod. Comment on the post for this week. And we will be back next week with a new story. And until then, I'll keep snooping so you don't have to. This is She Investigates, signing off.